Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this first session of Leading Through Transitions, where Dr. Jennifer Brown and I, Dr. Kulshreshtha, well, I'm going to be just Shub, are going to talk about everything related to transition. So whether it's before starting a new job or after starting a new job, transitions happen to all of us, and we're going to break down a few of the topics. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
So I guess we can start off with some introductions. Dr. Brown, would you like to start us off?
Sure, absolutely. So, hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Jennifer Brown. I am a former higher education administrator, previously provost and vice president, but I've held other jobs in academia as well. Um, I am the CEO and founder of North Star Consulting Solutions, and I have over 20 years in higher education and 10 years as a senior administrator. I'll just share that part of why I started my company was I saw a crucial gap in leadership development. And I've always had a big heart, an empathetic and authentic heart, and I've wanted to help more folks as they just go down their pathways and their journeys. So I'll stop there and I'll hand it over to Dr. Shub.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm Shub. I'm an emergency medicine doctor, and I've been now in the UK for the last 5 years, but I started my journey in India where I did medicine, and with Dala actually, in Manipal University. And as I progressed through the years doing medicine, I realized that there's a bit more that I could do with the skill set and a bit more impact that I could make. And that's what's helped me transition into coaching. And now I'm looking back at my own life and other people sort of doing the same journey and the same path, realizing that there's this phase after you've put in all of the hard work to get the interviews, to get the job, and then you've crossed it onto the other side. And then there's a real empty space on the other side where there's lack of support, there's lack of awareness of what's actually going on, and how to make the most of that, because it really is a crucial time, as we're going to be talking about the first 90 days. And that's what's led me to focus my area of executive coaching into that space. But before we head in there, should we talk about how we actually met?
Sure. Would you like to tell the story?
Well, I'm very short with my stories usually,
Right.
but yeah, essentially it was when we decided to take on our coaching journey, and that's where we've come across each other, and we found a lot of commonalities between the world of medicine and the world of academia as well, surprisingly. So that's sort of what's brought us here in a very high level gist.
Yeah, I love that. And, as Dr. Shep said, we saw that we had a lot of commonalities. I remember calling my mom and saying, "Oh my gosh, the life of an emergency medical doctor is similar to one of a provost, right? In the fact that there are continuous meetings and thinking through how to start every meeting refreshed and as if nothing else has happened before or after that." And it was really important to make that parallel. And as we continue to have conversations and thinking through who we wanted to serve, I think we both came to a separate decision that folks who are transitioning into new roles or transitioning from different institutions or starting a role for the very first time, there was something that we could do to help them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's dive a bit deeper into that, shall we? Let's talk about why these first 90 days are such a big deal and why there was a whole book written on it. What is the big deal behind the first 90 days?
Well, we know that there's only one opportunity to make a good first impression. And I look at this as a development of leadership capacity and thinking about why joining a new institution is so important. There's so many things that could go right or wrong within that first 90 days. And so thinking about um, who your team is, what does the organization stand for, how you present yourself as a leader, which we'll talk about all of those things today and as we move forward in our biweekly lives. But it's important to just start on a fresh, solid footing. It's so important. Shub, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really opens up a few doors for you. It really opens up career opportunities. both for your current role as well as for the next role. It opens up opportunities to get good feedback early on and set a good impression, as you said. And I think from our clinical world, we're often looking at procedural skills and other day-to-day opportunities that we may end up struggling for the next rest of the job. But if we set up the first 90 days really well, we can really create a good impact and open those opportunities. And then everything else that comes after that, the exams, the family, the health, the balancing our time, it all becomes a lot easier once we've taken care of those first 90 days.
Yeah, that's great. Can I add one more thing to that?
Absolutely.
So I think, Shub and I are both saying that it sets the foundation for long-term success. It's helpful and crucial to make a strong first impression. It helps to build credibility quickly. And the early wins, which we'll talk about, establish momentum and confidence both for the leader and the team. And so that's really the crux of the importance of the first 90 days.
Yeah. And I guess it's also a time when we often tend to fall into some common traps. And I can sort of talk about what they might be for medics, but I wonder if they might be quite similar for people in academia as well. And I think just generally high performing academics and medics could probably fall into either of these. So a few that I've got written down here with me are we tend to take on a bit too much too fast. And I think there's often a tendency to try and prove ourselves when we've started our new job. And we like to leave a good impression by taking on good responsibility and showing that we worked really hard. So we often overpromise and sometimes struggle to deliver. Often we also try and stick with what we know and what was going really well in our previous job or where we were earlier, and we try and do that again really well one more time, hoping that'll yield the same results. I don't know, does any of this sort of resonate with you, Dr. Brown?
Absolutely. It does resonate. What I thought about to add on to what you said is trying to make changes too quickly, right? So leaders may feel pressure to make an immediate impact and they start implementing changes before they fully understand the organization's culture or the challenges or even the team dynamics. We'll talk a little bit more, but not building relationships, that's key to your first 90 days. And I think about some leaders who may prioritize, tasks over people and neglecting to build the relationships, right? So some folks may think that the title in itself is what's going to drive folks to do the work, but it's not the title, it's the relationships. I think something else is failure to clarify expectations and thinking about assumptions that may be made, that they know what's expected, or they focus on what they think is most important without clarifying the role and key priorities with either their supervisor or stakeholders. Uh, Shub, you talked about overcommitting. I think one last one that I'll share is assuming authority without earning trust, right? So assuming that title alone commands the respect and authority. I talked about that a little bit earlier without investing time and earning the trust of the team.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, such crucial things to get right and such a heavy price to pay to struggle through that bit, and essentially talking about the decisions you make leading to almost a loss of trust with the rest of the team before you've even actually gotten to work with them. I just want to take a quick moment as well to welcome everyone else who's joined us. Stephen, Ronald, and Dr. Ross, thanks for joining us. Do you think this is a good moment to try and ask if how this resonates with everybody listening to us at the moment, and if this might be something that they're going through?
Absolutely. Let's bring some folks on the stage.
Yeah, raise your hand if you'd like to come up and speak to us, or just give us a thumbs up if this is something that you're currently going through. Well, that's good. That's really, really good. We've hopefully not hit those roadblocks yet, or managed to overcome them, and starting to unlock those benefits of getting the first 90 days right. Give us a heart if you're still listening to us. All right, thank you very much. Fantastic. So I guess the next bit that I think we would like to both dive into is we've understood why it's important to get these 90 days right. We've understood what the common traps might be, but what do we do about it? Any initial thoughts on that, Dr. Brown?
Absolutely. Well, I always talk to my clients about a general approach of their first 90 days. And to keep it short and sweet here, I think the first 30 days is when you're really trying to listen and learn. You're meeting your key team members, stakeholders within the organization or company or institution. You're understanding current processes and challenges and identifying quick wins to build credibility for you and your team or your division. So that's the first 30 days, listen and learn. And then the next 30 days, which would be your 60-day mark, you're analyzing and strategizing, where you're assessing team dynamics and performance. You're developing initial strategies for improvement, and you're beginning implementing quick wins. Remember, in the last question, we talked about really build trust with your team members. And so as you're analyzing and strategizing, you're doing that simultaneously, and then the last 90 days are act and innovate. And you're presenting a long term vision and goals. You're starting to implement larger strategic initiatives. And you're always evaluating your progress and adjusting as needed. So that's my really quick checklist of things that people do. And then, of course, in my sessions, we go deeper into detail. What about you, Shep?
Yeah, I really like that breakdown of the first 90 days into the first 30 days and then so onwards. I think I completely agree with you that the first 30 days are a unique set where it's almost like people are, I wouldn't want to use the word judging, but they're kind of ascertaining whether you're part of their tribe or not. Do you fit in or not? I think they're looking at what values do you play by and how you make your decisions. Um, do you have expectations from yourself that they would have from themselves? I know that's a bit of a mind bender one. Um, and and I think a big part of what, at least when it comes to working on the shop floor, is because we often work with new people every day, is the kind of energy you leave the room with when you're sort of done with your shift. And I think all of those things kind of feed into perception they build of you in the first 30 days, like you said, is extremely crucial. And in a similar way, I also break down the key things to achieve in your first 90 to 180 days.
Shep, that was a great list. I think listening to both of us, if we step back and zoom out for a little bit, I think that it's really important for us as leaders, or even as you're coming in, if you're not the leader in the organization, but just joining a new team, is to help people understand how you think and how you work. And some folks might say that's part of creating a vision. I think, you could talk about whether you have a collaborative approach, how you align with organizational goals, but helping people understand your values so that they can understand how you tend to make decisions will be crucial to stability, building trust, and gaining momentum as you move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Any recommendations? Oh, we've got a question, Stephen. Would you like to come up and speak to us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, great. Thank you for hosting, and just happened to come across this as I was scrolling through my LinkedIn, and I am struck by how sometimes when I've been applying for jobs, you can, prepare for the interview as best as you can and read institutional mission goals and visions. And, from a pragmatic standpoint, it seems oftentimes these are very aspirational rather than things that could actually be realized, except for in instances when they might be. And then bringing these things up in an interview, for example, where you're given maybe 5 to 10 behavioral based questions, these things really just don't come up. And so I'm wondering how you find the people who are going to fit best so that within those first 30 to 90 days, um, you have an ideal person who can do the job when those kind of questions aren't really asked in the initial stages of the selection process.
Yeah, Stephen, that's a great question. And I just want to ask a question of clarification. Um, for the last part of your question, are you referring to the person who is interviewing, or are you referring to yourself as the interviewer and you're looking for that person?
I am interviewing, and people who are interviewing me are asking behavioral-based questions that would nowhere near get at the thrust of what they're looking for as an organization.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to make some assumptions, but please correct me on these assumptions. I'm assuming that the roles that you're interviewing for, it is a maybe 1 day or 2 day process with multiple stakeholders.
Yeah. Usually there's a screening process.
Right.
I haven't seen too many more. I haven't seen too many interviews that go much beyond 2 days, or two interviews. One as a screening process, and the next as a whittling down of the applicant pool to find someone who's a better fit. And then,
Right.
in some instances, in that first interview, you have like an HR representative, the hiring manager, maybe one or two other people. In other instances, you might have a full body of staff members and stakeholders who seem to be ready to go without too much more um, in the way of processes or next round interviews. And then other times, more typically, it seems like there's a second interview where you may have other stakeholders that are not directly involved,
Yes.
but are additional stages of that maybe day-long interview.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So, part of how I and others that I know have approached this in the past is that as the as the person who is interviewing, it I start with research. And so when I'm looking at the organization, one of the first things that I go to is, especially if they are accredited, I go to their accreditation report. And sometimes, even if it's been a couple of years, there are things that are in that report that help me to understand what the true issues are in that organization. And those are the things that I will bring up in my question time to see whether they are still issues. The other thing that I think is important based on your question um, is, of course, it depends on the type of position, but if it has a position profile and if there is a recruiter attached, that is another way to do some homework ahead of time of what the key issues are. Oftentimes, if you have a search firm, they will share, here's what they're trying to accomplish, here's what they're doing. And then you can ask questions from there. And again, then I use my question time when I'm actually in that interview to parcel out whether these situations are still top of mind and exist. I think working on and understanding the organizational chart with respect to whatever the role is that you're moving into, who are the key players and stakeholders in those areas will be critical. Because of course, each stakeholder will have a different viewpoint of what the real issue is, right? And so what you're just trying to do is get as much information from each of those groups as possible and then ascertain on your own, or with help from others, what the real issues are. I'll stop there, Stephen, to see if that's hitting on some of what you're asking.
Yeah, thank you. And it is hitting on some of what I'm asking, but then no, not not in some ways not. And that would be like, I've heard from like different recruiters that it's a good idea to tie in, these these institutional values that are stated explicitly, and then are never brought up again with the people who are on the ground doing the work
Hmm.
and in the interview process. So like with a behavioral question where I hear about, typical kinds of questions are like, um, tell us about how you handle a difficult coworker or something like that, where I'd expect to hear something like, tell us about your experience dealing with um, instances of institutional racism or something like that. If it's stated in a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, for example, on a website at the institution.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Stephen, what's interesting is that institutions, I'm trying to think of how I want to say this nicely, tend to be risk averse and
Right, of course.
oftentimes, right? And oftentimes they have a blank checklist of things that they're going to ask across the board. And
Yeah.
what I think I hear you saying is that oftentimes those behavioral interview questions don't really hit the mark on what it is that you would be doing specifically and how you might fit in as the interviewee, or even how they're going to address it as the interviewer. And
Now
so
you're hitting the buttons there,
yeah,
Brown.
yeah,
It's like, um, these are very vanilla, and I'm not really sure it matches with what you're trying to do.
correct.
And then, as you were saying earlier, um, getting an understanding from the recruiter about if those values or whatever are even still pertinent is a good question, because I know, um, for example, of situations where, people have regent meetings and all of that just changes and people don't have time to update their websites because it just happened.
Right.
So, and
Right.
still processes are happening.
Yeah. And that's where I was tying the first part of my answer
Yeah.
into. So here are some ways that I can dig into what's really happening because their questions are going to be the same across the board.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
So, getting back to the thrust of your transition session, your first 90 days, how do you know you have the right person, and how, as a person, do you know you've selected the right place to be? I feel like that will have a large impact in how you manage your first 90 days.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Well, to think about how do you know if you've selected the right place? I think that it's a continual conversation, right? It's similar, in my opinion, only to just regular relationships that we have, right? Friendships, and that every day is a new opportunity to see how people react with whatever is thrown our way, right?
Uh-huh.
So if I think about the first 90 days, I'm looking at my supervisor, I'm looking at stakeholders and the things that were told to me in the interview, or even as I meet with my supervisor for the very first, second, or third time, what are the key things that they're asking me to accomplish? And does this align with what is being said? Now, in my realm, where, I was working towards being a vice provost and dean of undergraduate education or the dean of the graduate school, or when I'm in provost, oftentimes these search committees write the profiles. They were approved by the hiring authority, but oftentimes um, your direct supervisor may have initiatives and things that they want you to do that are slightly different from what that profile is, right?
Yeah.
And to go back to your question, as you're going through those 30, 60, 90 days, you're looking for things like, is my supervisor supporting me? Are folks taking the time to share the nuances and backstory, whether I ask directly or are they forthcoming and telling me things that will help me to ascertain the things that I need to discern in order to carry out those sets of initiatives. So part of it is, you're looking every day for context clues and making sure.
Oh, I lost you, Dr. Brown. Your mic went out.
Yes, my computer went off. That was a
All right.
moment. Sorry about that.
You're
But I was
saying
just saying,
context clues, something?
yeah, you're looking for the context clues of if your supervisor is saying, I want you to do this in the first 6 months, right? Are they giving you the backstory, the information? Are they, allowing you to go out and um, understand for yourself what's happening in that organization when you're coming back and checking in and talking with them about here's what I'm seeing so far. Are they continuing to be forthright and understanding and sharing context, right? Or things a secret. And believe it or not, I've been in places where things were a secret and I was
Oh,
still
I believe it.
yeah, and I was still asked to
It's like I
move
feel
on.
like sometimes you have to survive these
Yes,
places. I don't want to sound like a cynical person because, as an applicant
yeah,
or even as a person in the first 90 days, you want to have a shiny disposition and a can-do attitude, I think.
that's right.
But if it's not all okay in the neighborhood,
Then you have to make some decisions.
yeah,
Right? And that has happened too, right? Where you go, this is not the place that I thought it was. And so now what do I do? Right. So that's maybe we do a different live on that. But to sum up and answer your question, the first 90 days, you're looking to make sure that folks are being authentic, genuine, that they are sharing information that is pertinent, that is a business need to know. Um, and you're assessing folks, you're asking them, well, so you asked a second question about, how do you assess the folks that are, I'm going to say, working for you as a direct report, right?
mhm,
And I think part of it is getting to know them. So spending time individually with each person, whether that's one on one, as well as talking with the team. And you're doing the same thing as you're assessing the institution. You're looking for and understanding what it is that they're working on. You're, what do they feel are their top accomplishments? What are they most proud of? What do they need help with? What is getting in the way of helping, of achieving X, Y, and Z if you see there's a gap? And then you're asking them to do things that would hopefully set them up for success. And we're looking to see whether they can achieve it, right? So it's short, you know, um, interactions, it's building trust, it's helping them understand how you think, it's telling them here are the things that I expect. What is it that you need to accomplish that? And you're doing that not in a dictator way, but it's a flowing conversation of really getting to know what um what motivates them, right? What drives them? Why are they there? Why did they come? Why do they stay there? One institution I was in, folks stayed for 10 to 20 years, right? And so, on one hand, that is a wonderful thing. On the other hand, sometimes the folks in that institution did not know any other way. Sometimes they did not know the best practice. And so, how do you get them to move along? This curve where they are accelerating and growing in their field. I hope that helps, Stephen.
yeah, it makes me think of this book I'm reading by Jill Scott called Radical Candor, and
Mm,
updated edition called Radical Respect, where she talks about two different kinds of employees or staff members, and both are required or necessary in a team. You have your rock stars and you have your shooting stars. And the question to be asked is tenure respected? In other words, do you have to move up to move out, or have to move out to move up? Or can you stay working in a position and continuing to grow and add value uh, in a single position that you're at? Uh, for example, like you just brought up, you could be at an institution for 10 to 15 years or maybe even longer. And that could be a great sign, or it could be a sign that you're just stifled.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, when I heard your question first, I thought, oh, I know absolutely nothing about how recruitment happens in higher education, but actually your question about difficult colleagues very much resonated with me. We see a lot of that in medicine as well. And I really liked your question. I guess I really liked the discussion we just had around how do you actually figure out the values and how do you demonstrate them in your interview as well. One of the things that sort of came to my mind with the comfort of being in a listener's position was how the values are actually embodied. So they sort of get embodied through the decisions you make and the way you communicate certain things. And I guess if you're given a question around a difficult colleague or a tricky situation which has some ambiguity in terms of how you would manage it, that's usually often a good opportunity to sort of put in the same words or even explicitly say, as per your values, I would choose this over this or prioritize X over Y. But really, when you start your first 90 days and you're trying to figure out what really are the values, I know they've sort of published something on the website, but what are the real values? The two things that were coming to my mind were in terms of looking at people's actions and decision making to think about whether they're ends driven or means driven. So are they focused on the end product and the outcome, or are they focused on doing things right and properly? And the other one that sort of came to my mind was to simply look at what gets rewarded and what gets punished, and often that will reveal the underlying values.
Yes, that was another thing that Jill Scott points out in her book is, you could use this in an interview question where you're asking a committee member or the hiring manager, like, tell me about a time where you had to point out a team member who was doing well so that other people who weren't doing well could see a good example.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's all in those sort of situations, in those gray zones when there isn't a written script or a protocol that people are following. In those gray zones is where things really reveal themselves, and that's what you want to look for. It's really challenging to find those gray zones before you've joined an organization, because I think, as Dr. Brown was saying, they're quite protected. But once you're on the other side, hopefully you can.
Yeah, it seems like you've got to find the cusp of where you've asked an acceptable question, but yet provocative enough to keep their interest in you.
Yeah.
And you run the risk of becoming eliminated or moving on to the next round.
But what's interesting with that, Stephen, is as I look back through my multiple experiences at this point in my life and time, if I were to interview again, I'd want to show my provocative side because I am an innovator and I am a person who wants to solve problems. I am a connector and builder. I want to bring teams together and solve cross-functional issues. And if folks don't want that, I'd rather be eliminated than get there and then folks say, "Oh no, you're not the person for me," right?
It's
And
a
so,
privileged perspective, but you're absolutely right.
well, Stephen, and I don't disagree with that. Um, but we can talk on offline, but I'll share with you, yes, there is some privilege there, but there's also some realism in terms of
Absolutely.
um getting to a place where folks have decided that you, even though they've picked you, you're not their candidate, right? That they changed their mind because you're too real. They thought you were one way.
Yes.
They thought you were timid, but you're a driver.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Dr. Shubhendu. I'm going to stop hogging up the airspace here and give other people a chance.
No, that was a beautiful discussion. I think
Wonderful. Yeah,
segues,
thank you so much.
it also segues really nicely into what we were hoping to talk about next in terms of the sort of high level strategy to approach your first 90 days. And I think, Dr. Brown, you briefly mentioned it. Um, do you sort of have phases that you would suggest people to focus on different things in?
Yeah, I'll throw a couple of things out there, and I want to say to Stephen, I'm so happy that you came up and joined us, and we're provocative in the things that you've talked about. These are real issues, and it's part of why we wanted to give this space where we weren't just talking, but that we allowed folks to really say what's on their mind. So I first just want to say thank you. Thanks for coming up. To your question, Dr. Shub, one thing I think about is building trust quickly, and that's with stakeholders, direct reports, that's with, people vertical and horizontal within the organization. And I think about uh, just really the idea about transparency and emphasizing the importance of open, honest communication from day one. And going back to some of Stephen's comments earlier, when I said, every day you have to just look and see what happens as you are going through the day and moving forward towards initiatives. Part of what you're, looking for is, are folks transparent with you, right? This listening that we talked about in the first 30 days, active listening is so important in discovering how folks are acknowledging, um, you know, interacting with other folks. It builds rapport when you can do that. Follow through as you are looking and talking with your direct reports, or you're talking with your direct supervisor, or you're talking across stakeholders, as you start to figure out what your early wins are going to be or initiatives that you're driving forward. It's really about highlighting the impact of keeping your promises and commitments, no matter how small, so that you can build those small moments of trust. It's really important. We haven't talked about trust um, in depth, and maybe, Dr. Shub, we can talk about that on another live. But it's so important that people recognize that trust is about not grand gestures, but it is really about the small moments that count. And every day, as you go through your institution, and you're talking with different folks, it's really about keeping all of the commitments, following through, talking with folks. Um, I believe in authentic leadership. And one of the things that I'll share is, when you think about building trust and building it quickly, vulnerability is really important. If you think about sharing appropriate personal experiences, humanizing leadership, going back to helping folks understand how you make decisions, and then going back to one of Stephen's questions, recognize an expertise, right? Mentioning the value of acknowledging team member skills and contributions, and understanding how people want to be recognized, right? Some people want the grandiose gesture, some people want the behind the scenes thank you, and just knowing who needs what, but making sure that within those one-on-one conversations or meetings that you're having, you're recognizing what they bring to the table, and also thinking about how to develop them as they move forward. So that's a lot there. But I just, those were 5 things that could really help in those first 90 days, and thinking about how to begin building the trust.
Yeah, got so much value in there, all of that data. As something
Do
useful.
you have any thoughts about that?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. As that was really useful. There was so much value in there and so much actionable tips for people to take away. I have a similar sort of approach. I sort of club 2 things into the first 30 days to help build the trust as you did, and leadership is a huge part of it. I tend to talk about the leadership and your communication styles, and the strong relationships you build in that section as well within the first 30 days. And in addition, I often tend to talk about and work on reliable clinical decision making, because that really forms the foundation of how we're perceived in the clinical setting. And after the first 30 days, what I really like to recommend people to do is move towards solving key issues for the organization. So really flipping that equation on itself. So initially, you come into a new organization, you're often asking for help, you're often asking for directions, or a little bit of support, and people go out of their way to accommodate you. But as quick as you can, try and flip that around and start giving back to the organization, start giving back to the people that you work with, and solve key issues for them. And I think that really makes the difference between a good employee and a great employee that the organization wants to go out of their way to hold on to. And that's the phase in which you kind of hone your strengths and play to your strengths and say, okay, I really like research work or improvement work or innovation work, or education's my thing, and you put on a hat and you really deliver in a way that you enjoy it, in a way that plays to your strengths and is really valued by the organization as well.
Those are great tips, Dr. Shub. I really appreciate you sharing that with the group.
Thank you. And I guess we can open up for another few set of questions at this point. If anyone's got any particular questions they'd like answered, or if at all this resonated with you, just give us a thumbs up. And you're more than welcome to send us a question in our personal messages, or raise your hand and we can bring you up to and address individual concerns if there are any. Brilliant. Some hearts and some thumbs up. So it's really resonated with a lot of people. That's fantastic. I'd really like to hear if this particularly helped unlock an opportunity for somebody, or has driven them to take some action in the coming week at all. Yeah, well, I really, really enjoyed this. I think for me personally, there was so much takeaway in terms of understanding what matters in the first 90 days and where to focus on to find a way through those first 90 days. What about you, Dr. Brown?
Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation between you and I, and with Stephen as well. And if folks want to continue the conversations, or if you want to hear more, we plan on doing this bi-weekly. So not the next week, but I wish I had my dates up so I could tell you. I'm trying to get to my calendar right now. Let's see. So we plan on doing this November 1st, right, as our next live, where we continue to talk about items that are important in transition. And we'd love to hear from you about things that either you are thinking about, working through, or would just like to hear more.
And where can they hear a bit more about North Star Consulting?
Yes. So I will actually put something out to all of you. You can go to https:/illuminateyournorthstar.com, or you could simply go to my page, my LinkedIn page, and it is on the website, and would love to hear from you.
That's fantastic. And I've got my website on coachwithshub.com. But we're all on LinkedIn, as is everyone else on this call. And we'd love for you to connect with us. Tell us what you like, tell us what you didn't like, and particularly what you'd like us to cover in the next one.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure having everyone here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. See you all in 2 weeks.
See you at the next one.